Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm continuing my Goosebumps The Vanishing episode reviews for you all. We're going to be looking at episode 6, titled The Girl Next Door. Now, I don't know if this is the official title of the episode because some sources claim that it was supposed to be titled The Ghost Next Door, but everywhere else says it's The Girl Next Door. So, for the sake of continuity moving forward with this video review, because it's going to be on the internet forever, until the title gets updated on Hulu and Disney Plus to The Ghost Next Door, I'm just going to have the episode titled in the review handle here, The Girl Next Door. So just know that up front. Now, with that out the way, this episode kind of felt like a good surprise to me. I didn't really know how I would feel going into this, knowing the information I knew beforehand. This was one of the episodes that I heard about in the rumor mills before the show came out that was supposed to be directed by the Blair Witch Project director, and it was supposed to be almost entirely found footage, going into the perspective of the kids from the 90s that disappeared in the opening of the season. So I was like, okay, this is probably going to be a expository episode, but, you know, given this show's track record with expository content, I was thinking that at worst it's probably going to be meh, but we'll see. But I came out of this episode thinking that this was my second favorite episode from the entire show, maybe next to Stay Out of the Basement Part 1 and Part 2. And I would say that this is probably, next to those episodes, the only other genuinely good episode from this show. Or this season, I should say. I really like this one. I like that it felt a little more subdued and laid back, and we got to see the perspective of these kids we got introduced to in the cold open, and build on the characters that have been kind of the heartbeat of the story, in the motive behind Dr. Brewer wanting to look into their disappearance, and even the cop detective Diaz, and all of that. So yeah, take that for what you will, but I found myself enjoying this one. It's a lot of information that you kind of need to know in the story, so off the bat, I like that, given the track record of the other episodes. But nonetheless, I have a lot to say, so we'll get right into the plot synopsis and the review portion. But I should say up front as well, and I keep saying this every review, I know a lot of you probably expect me to be bashing this show and hating on it for Disney and Sony making it. You're not going to get that from me here. I'm judging the material as it is, by itself, without the parent companies who make it being even in the equation. And if you want to hear more of my thoughts on that specific thing, stay tuned for my season review at the very end of the series, and I'll give my 2 cents there. But when it comes to the judging the content here in these reviews, I'm not going to do that. If you want to put some disdain in the comments section towards me for that, that's fine. I'll drop you a like in the heart and move on with my day. So, with that out the way, let's talk about The Girl Next Door. So this episode starts off with an opening that picks up from the ending of episode 5, The Boy Who Cried Monster. And we see the gray-haired doctor lady with a mutilated body of Dr. Brewer in some lab-looking place. It's kind of vague in its description because of the lighting, but we see that she's perhaps doing something to his body, which is kind of jarring in that scary kind of way, because you realize what's happening to Dr. Brewer, and you see very quickly that things are not going well whatsoever for his character in terms of where he ends up. Let's just say it might have some resemblance to some characters that disappeared in the 90s, okay? But when we get the answer on that, we get the title credits, and then the episode kicks on. So it picks up where episode 5 left off with the core cast here. Devin is off trying to find Hannah because he felt compelled near the end of the story of episode 5 to go look for her because he heard a whisper and he ends up meeting up with her, and there's a whole side plot involving that. But the main plot here is the rest of the kids, which consists of CJ, Frankie, Alex, Trey, and Cece. They have this VHS tape that was left behind by Officer Diaz when she came to visit Dr. Brewer's house in the episode prior. And there's a stupid gag going throughout this episode where Trey doesn't know what a VHS is, and he's calling it a VHS, and it's so cringe. Like, come on. Like, I get that this is supposed to be a Gen Z show, but you're telling me that Gen Zs, who are very nostalgia heavy and very Millennium Y2K nostalgic for some reason, don't know what a VHS is? Come on, y'all. But anyway, that aside, and some cringe involving that, the kids realize that they don't have a VHS player because, it's 2024/2025. So what they need is somebody who has one. And Cece knows that a place that definitely would have one is the care facility that her grandmother is at. And they go to the grandmother's facility, and they pull out this old TV with a VCR combo that you would have seen back in the day at your like schools if you grew up in the late 90s and early 2000s. And they pop the VHS recording in, and Alex knows that this tape belonged to her mom, and because of the packaging and the context with it all being that it wasn't her mom's possession. So Alex kind of wants to watch this to get some answers for her and her mom's own involvement with these disappeared teens from the 90s. And we get immediately introduced to the characters in the tape, which is the found footage aspect to it. And it's mostly involved with Stink at the beginning being the videographer, and him capturing as a young teen in 1994, doing some botany in his basement. And we get a snippet in what their life was like back when him and his older brother were, growing up inside of the grandmother's house that most of the story has taken place in. And we see that the older brother, essentially, and his three other friends, I think one is named Samir, I forget the other girl's name, and then you have Hannah, who's this new girl that they kind of befriend and join in on the group. And they are trying to do a senior prank at their school by going to stay at this military bunker, which was known to them as Camp Nightmare, because at one point we learn in this episode that Camp Nightmare is actually built on what used to be the grounds of an old camp called Camp Night Moon, where campers would go and, I guess, do their thing and whatnot. And we get some more expository information on that in episode 7 later on. But Stink really doesn't want his brother to do this because he knows the legends associated with it and think it might be dangerous or haunted or what have you. And his brother, the entire found footage segment recording, is trying to convince him that it's going to be okay. He's going to be with his friends. It isn't going to be something that's going to backfire. But as we know in the story, it really does. So the emotions with Stink kind of do register here. But there's also some more information on the tape as well, where we see, Hannah and Stink's brother, Anthony, who is played by David Schwimmer in the story as a young kid. His older brother has this possible connection with Hannah, but he has an ex-girlfriend who ends up being a young Officer Diaz, who's been a main adult character in the story, looking into the investigation all these years, along with Anthony. Kind of more in the actual fold than Anthony ever was, I should say. But we learn that she's a jealous ex-girlfriend of this brother character, and she has some bad blood with him and makes fun of him and tries to steal the recorder and kind of film their drama on tape. And we see this scene where she hazes Hannah because her ex-boyfriend is into her, and they have a falling out and a fight that kind of ends badly. So there's kind of some insinuation that maybe Officer Diaz knows a lot more information than she's letting on about this disappearance of these 4 teenagers, which we do find out by the end of the tape. But we see that Hannah was essentially recruited to this group on the tape to be the videographer, and they use her main perspective for the remaining of the found footage once we get caught up to speed with the events that happened in the cold open of the first episode and what happened to the older brother. And we see that Hannah, along with the others, gets dragged down into this bunker that was just depicted as a hole in episode 1, but this is the hole that the black substance came out of. And she's down there with the camcorder, fighting for her life against this shadowy creature. And what she sees down there shows that these characters, kind of like what happens to Anthony in the cold open of this episode, are being stored in some sort of alien pods, and their naked physical bodies are inside of the pod surrounded by this goop, but we have no idea what that means. So before we really get a sense of what's going to happen next to Hannah, the tape kind of, cuts out because she loses control of it. And the next time that we see the tape in the hands of somebody else, it's being dragged back up to the surface by this random person who's wearing a hazmat suit and notices that the teen's clothes are on the ground above. And she sits the camera off to the side, but once she hears some people are coming to the area, she runs off. And the tape kind of ends on Officer Diaz and Anthony, who were, teenagers at the time, coming together to try to stop the teens from staying at this bunker overnight as a senior prank. And they notice that the kids are missing and they freak out, and Diaz ends up finding the camcorder and realizes that it's recording, and that's how she got in possession of this tape the whole time. And also there's some stuff that happens while the teens are watching this with the grandmother. They're watching it with her because they think that it would be appropriate for her to see it for some reason. And the grandmother has dementia, right? And this is the last time that you see her in the story. Yeah, spoiler alert here. But she seems upset that the kids are going into the bunker area when that shot is shown. And it causes the teens to have to pause the tape at certain points to calm her down and stuff like that. And then, of course, you still have the lingering drama going on with Frankie and Trey, and they're trying to talk about what happened the night of the car incident at the shop with the creature that Frankie thought was Trey, but that really never gets expounded on ever again. So that's kind of there. And then basically once that stuff is wrapped up, the kids realize that this Hannah girl on the tape must be who Devin has been communicating with, and they have to go try to help Devin because perhaps this Hannah person is going to take him away, and what's going to happen to him is probably what happened to the teens that they saw on the tape footage. So basically all the other information that is shown in this episode really comes down to Devin and Hannah having an experience going over to the old parts of the military bunker that used to be Camp Night Moon. And Hannah's trying to essentially convince Devin to jump in the water and do all this crazy stuff. And luckily his friends come to stop him, but we realize there's a twist with Hannah that involves that Devin, since he was the first person that has been made contact with in some time by whatever this black goo substance is, everybody else who's ever touched it can communicate with him and him only. And while it's never explained again, it's just treated like another ability that this thing has. And that's a running gag with this substance in this show. But luckily his friends kind of snap him out of it. And they realize, once they all kind of compare notes, that the next order of business moving forward is to do more research about this gray-haired woman. Because the gray-haired woman was the doctor that supposedly helped Trey. And somehow Trey was fixed. And Trey's not feeling any side effects like Cece and Devin are. So their new mission is going to try to go and find some research on where to find this woman. And that's essentially where the episode leaves off. And that's all you really need to know about this episode, The Girl Who Cried Monster. Oh, not The Girl Who Cried Monster. The girl next door. Sorry, I get this and the boy next to the boy who cried monster confused because they're kind of similar in title, I guess. But anyways, yeah, this episode, in my opinion, was pretty enjoyable. For essentially an expository dump of an episode, it was a wild ride, and I like seeing the emotions of a young Anthony Brewer, in the motions of all of that going with his older brother. I thought that was really rich, and it helped humanize Anthony Brewer even more as a character, and bridging the gap between that event that happened that fateful day to his present and his current status. I felt that that was very harrowing for the story, and that's where this part of the season really started to hook me in to what's going to happen next. I thought that in the first two episodes, and then once we got through the slump, I was kind of getting taken out of it a little bit. But this episode really got me invested into seeing what's going to happen more in the future. And I think in terms of a long-form storytelling season like The Vanishing is, you need episodes like this to keep the intrigue alive. And this is probably one of the more intriguing episodes that the show had to offer for this season. So yeah, all the information that we learned about these characters were really fun, and I like the fact that it characterized Officer Diaz and Anthony without actually having them present in the story. It was kind of like, finding some relic of the past and looking into it, and I thought that was an intriguing angle. And the found footage angle that this episode went with, and the creativity behind that, isn't groundbreaking by any means. This is nowhere near the best found footage thing I've ever seen. But the fact that Goosebumps tried to put it into the show was really cool. And I think for the most part, it was well done and was well shot. Yeah, you can tell that there's an obvious VHS grain quality and it's not real VHS recording going on here in the footage. But it looks good. It looks good. And it was visually compelling. And yeah, I had a lot of fun with it when it comes to that. There's some really chilling shots down in the bunker, especially when Hannah's like kind of isolated in the found footage segment, where we finally get a glimpse of a potential creature that might be lurking down in the depths, and that's pretty cool stuff. That's what found footage is known for, having dark lit areas and looking over in the shadows and seeing a creature looking at you. That was creepy, and it got to me a little bit. And also, going back to the cold open of this episode, I thought that was great stuff. Probably my second favorite cold open of the entire show. Maybe next to episode 2, which was Stay Out of the Basement Part 2's cold open. So yeah, and this episode had a really electric pace. It's one of the shorter episodes. Yeah, it had some, detours with Devin and Hannah, but I thought that while that stuff was kind of boring, where it ends is really cool because we know that there's some steam going into the next episode with that. So even at the worst, I think that this episode was pretty good overall. All said and done, I should say, because there are some negatives with it, like pretty much all the other episodes. But I will say that the negatives aren't really the same as the others because the drama is kind of put off to the side for this episode, thankfully, and we get a break from it for a good amount of it. But I will say this, there is some things with, Alex and Cece, I think kind of near the end of it, but that's neither here or there. Very minimal. My main problems with the story is we're getting to the point of the story where things have to click on, and because of pace, we kind of have to mull over some aspects of the story and kind of use some plot convenience to get it trucking. And one thing that really stood out to me, or actually two things I should say, that happened were two specific characters when they're watching the footage magically coming to some conclusions that didn't really make much sense given the context of what we knew before. One of those being that Trey, who claims that he has zero memory of what happened to him once he got to the brewer freezer when he broke into the brewer's basement, suddenly somehow remembers that he was in the pod thing, and it helps the characters connect the dots that what happened to Trey is what's happening to the kids. Okay, that's a thing. And then the other thing involves CJ specifically coming to the conclusion about Hannah and the doctor. The Hannah thing I can kind of understand because, they could put context together that, oh, this Hannah girl must be who Devin's communicating. But the gray-haired doctor, y'all, when you look at a VHS tape, especially in that dark lit room with a woman wearing a hazmat suit, how do you make out that that's the same woman that you saw when you never actually saw her, CJ? You only saw her on some footage, right? And I should also mention this. The characters that weren't up to speed actually get to see this woman on some surveillance footage in this episode. I can't remember if it was episode 5 or near the end of episode 6, but they match up that this woman who CJ saw like one time in brief passing at the hospital, who's not the worker. He's like, oh yeah, that's her. But he's looking at grainy VHS footage when I believe he was not the one that got to see the footage at the hospital. So how do you make that out, CJ? How? Like, it's mind-boggling to me. But suddenly they know that this gray-haired woman is behind it all, even though they had a suspicion that she might be. Luckily for them, they had the insight to go track down the license plate. I kind of skimmed over this part, but they saw the license plate on the footage from the hospital, and because Trey was with them, he's like, well, we can go back to my shop, and since my dad works at an auto shop, we can run the plates and figure out who owns the car, blah, 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 and that's how they get a name to go with the face, right? So this plays a role later on. But then again, like, all this stuff feels a lot like in a lot of ways like plot convenience, and they just come to this stuff to help the plot move, and it doesn't really feel too earned. But other than those things, and maybe, some aspects of the found footage that I wish were kind of done better is maybe focusing on the horror side of things and not feeling like some scenes that were actually recorded on the tape were put there just to show some drama and turmoil between Diaz and the older brother that weirdly never gets expounded on by the end of the show. Because if you don't know, I've seen the whole show at this point, I can tell you, we really don't get any resolution with Diaz and her ex-boyfriend from high school and that drama and maybe her apologizing for it. It never happens. So take that for what you will. It feels like it's forced in here to kind of show that the kids also had drama back in the 90s. And there's some weird things that some 90s characters say in the found footage that just sounds really forced, especially with that one girl talking about her music interests. People don't talk like that. And that's all I'll say. But anywho, if I had to rate this episode from a 0 to 5 star basis, like I said, I thought this episode was genuinely good. And I don't put kitty gloves on for this show because I think it's not made for kids, so there's no need to. I judge it like young adult content and adult content by itself. So it has to really earn this score. But I'd probably give this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. This was a good episode. This is, like I said, my second favorite behind the State of the Basement 2-parter, and I enjoyed myself with it. I know that some people might like some episodes more than this one. I've had conversations that have shown me that people are kind of mixed on this episode, but I really enjoyed it. So that's just my thoughts on it. But yeah, that's what I think about The Girl Next Door, aka The Ghost Next Door. Let me know down in the comment section if you saw this episode. Did you enjoy this? Did you love it? Did you hate it? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.